The mahogany conference table stretched between them like a battlefield, Victoria Harper's manicured fingers drumming against its polished surface. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's skyline glittered with promise. But inside this corner office, the air crackled with something far more dangerous than ambition. Daniel Rodriguez hadn't looked up from his engineering reports once in the past hour, his calloused hands moving across technical drawings with the same gentle precision he used to braid his daughter's hair each morning. The silence stretched until Victoria's breath caught in her throat, words forming that would shatter the careful distance she'd built around her heart for 35 years. "Marry me, Daniel. I'll help you raise your daughters." The pen stopped moving. The city held its breath. 2 months earlier, Victoria Harper had stood in the same corner office, watching Daniel Rodriguez through the glass partition as he worked late into the evening. The rest of Harper Technologies had emptied hours ago, security guards making their final rounds while cleaning crews whispered in Spanish through the corridors. But Daniel remained at his drafting table, a small desk lamp casting warm light over blueprints that would revolutionize their next product line. His tie hung loose around his neck, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with the honest calluses of a man who had once built things with his hands before designing them with his mind. Victoria pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching him push wire-rimmed glasses up his nose with the back of his hand. She had hired him 8 months ago, based on his portfolio alone, never expecting the quiet intensity that followed him through the halls like a gravitational field. Other employees orbited around him naturally, drawn to his steady presence and the way he listened more than he spoke. The engineers respected his technical brilliance, but the administrative staff adored him for remembering their children's names and asking about their weekend plans. What Victoria hadn't anticipated was the way her chest tightened every time she watched him gather his things at the end of each day. His routine never varied. Laptop closed with careful precision, blueprints rolled and secured with rubber bands, and finally, the small framed photo he kept, turned face down during work hours, lifted gently and studied for exactly 3 seconds before sliding into his briefcase. She had glimpsed it once during a meeting. 2 young girls with his dark eyes and wide smiles, arms wrapped around each other in front of what looked like a Christmas tree. The cleaning woman, Maria, had paused beside Victoria's office that evening, her cart loaded with supplies and her weathered hands clutching a spray bottle. "That man, he's good father," she had said in careful English, nodding toward Daniel's departing figure. "My daughter, she goes to same school as his little ones. Every morning, he braids their hair. Perfect, like my grandmother used to do." Maria's eyes had softened with something that looked like respect. "The other mothers, they help him sometimes, but he never asks. Too proud, maybe." Victoria had turned away from the window then, returning to her desk where quarterly reports waited with their neat columns of numbers and projected growth margins. But the image stayed with her. Daniel Rodriguez, brilliant engineer, struggling with hair ribbons in the early morning light. The contradiction fascinated her in ways that board meetings and merger discussions never had. Her own mornings began in silence at 5:30, with black coffee and market updates streaming across 3 monitors in her downtown penthouse. By 6:15, she was in her private gym, running on a treadmill that faced the harbor, while news anchors delivered economic forecasts through wireless earbuds. Breakfast was a protein shake consumed in her Tesla during the 15-minute drive to the office, her assistant's voice updating her schedule through the car's speakers. Victoria had built Harper Technologies from nothing but a software idea and a $15,000 loan. 15 years later, she commanded a company worth $200 million, owned properties in 3 states, and had been featured on magazine covers that called her the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley. The nickname had never bothered her. Ice was clean, uncompromising, and infinitely more reliable than the messy warmth that complicated other people's decisions. But watching Daniel work that evening, something had shifted beneath her perfectly constructed surface. For the first time in years, Victoria found herself wondering what it would feel like to have someone turn a photograph face up at the end of the day, to have a reason to hurry home that had nothing to do with conference calls or stock portfolios. Daniel Rodriguez had once been destined for greatness. Victoria had pieced together fragments of his story through careful observation and discreet inquiries. His MIT professors had whispered about his potential in faculty lounges, calling him the kind of engineer who appeared once in a generation. At 28, he had been the youngest lead designer at Boeing, his innovations earning patents that still generated royalties 15 years later. Tech headhunters had courted him relentlessly, offering positions that would have made him a household name in Silicon Valley. Then Maria had gotten sick. The diagnosis had come during Grace's second birthday party, delivered by a doctor who spoke in careful euphemisms while children laughed in the background. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, stage 3. Daniel had left Boeing 2 weeks later, trading his corner office and six-figure salary for a modest position at a local engineering firm that offered flexible hours and comprehensive health insurance. He had told himself it was temporary, just until Maria recovered. But recovery had never come. Instead, there had been 3 years of hospital corridors and late-night phone calls from babysitters who couldn't handle Lily's nightmares. Daniel had learned to braid hair from YouTube videos, mastered the art of cooking dinner with one hand while helping Grace with homework, and perfected the skill of appearing strong when his world was crumbling around him. After the funeral, well-meaning friends had urged him to rebuild his career. "The girls need stability," they had said, as if money could replace the mother they had lost. But Daniel had seen the fear in Grace's eyes when he worked late, heard the catch in Lily's voice when she asked if he was coming home. His daughters had already lost one parent. He refused to lose them to ambition, so he had settled, taken the steady position at Harper Technologies that paid enough to keep them comfortable but not enough to advance, turned down promotions that would require travel, declined invitations to industry conferences that might have reopened doors to his former trajectory. He coached Grace's soccer team on Saturdays and helped with Lily's science projects, attended every parent-teacher conference and school play, built his life around their needs instead of his own potential. When Victoria had asked her head of HR about Daniel's performance reviews, the woman had shaken her head with something that looked like sympathy. "He's the most talented engineer we've ever hired," she had said, pulling his file from a secured cabinet. "But he won't take overtime, refuses any project that requires weekend work, and turns down every advancement opportunity we offer. It's like he's afraid to succeed." Victoria had studied the reports that evening in her penthouse office, surrounded by awards and accolades that marked her own relentless climb to the top. Daniel's evaluations were exceptional, his innovations saving the company millions, but his limitations were equally clear. He arrived exactly at 8:30 each morning and left precisely at 5:15. He had never attended a company social event, never joined colleagues for drinks, never participated in the networking that built careers in corporate America. The contrast between them had become impossible to ignore. While Victoria commanded boardrooms and negotiated deals that shaped entire industries, Daniel remained safely contained in the engineering department, brilliant but deliberately invisible. She owned properties worth more than he would earn in a lifetime. Her signature on a contract could change the trajectory of Fortune 500 companies. Her influence extended from Seattle to Silicon Valley, her opinions quoted in Wall Street Journal articles and Harvard Business Review case studies. Yet, watching him work, Victoria found herself envying something she couldn't quantify. The way he smiled when his desk phone rang at exactly 3:15 each afternoon, his daughters calling to confirm he would be at Lily's piano recital. The care with which he kept a small calendar covered in colorful stickers that marked school events and soccer games. The photo he studied each evening before leaving, as if drawing strength from the faces that smiled back at him. Victoria had never needed to draw strength from anyone. Strength was something she generated through discipline and determination, not something borrowed from others. But there was something in Daniel's quiet confidence that suggested a different kind of power, one that didn't require corner offices or magazine covers to validate its worth. But it was more than wonder that stirred in Victoria's chest as she watched Daniel's evening ritual. It was something darker, more complex. She found herself studying that photograph with an intensity that bordered on obsession, memorizing the faces of the two girls who commanded such devotion from their father. Grace, 12 years old with serious dark eyes and her father's steady gaze. Lily, 8 and gap-toothed, grinning at the camera with unguarded joy. They were beautiful children, but more than that, they were loved children. The kind of unconditional, fierce love that Victoria had never experienced and could barely comprehend. Sometimes, late at night in her penthouse apartment, Victoria would catch herself imagining what it would feel like to be looked at the way Daniel looked at that photograph. To be someone's first thought in the morning and last concern at night. To be chosen, not for what she could provide or accomplish, but simply for existing. The longing was so sharp it felt like hunger, a physical ache she couldn't satisfy with success or acquisition. But alongside the longing came something else. A bitter, shameful jealousy that two little girls possessed what she, with all her power and wealth, could never buy. They had their father's whole heart, his complete attention, his unwavering presence. They were the center of someone's universe in a way Victoria had never been, and suspected she never could be. This jealousy frightened her more than any business rival ever had, because it revealed a part of herself she didn't recognize. Vulnerable, wanting, achingly alone. 3 weeks into October, Victoria made her first real attempt to bridge the distance between their worlds. She had learned from her assistant that Daniel's daughters attended Lakewood Elementary, and Harper Technologies had been discussing a partnership with the school district for a coding program. Victoria could easily justify a site visit. She arrived during lunch hour, her heels clicking against the polished floors as a cheerful secretary led her toward the computer lab. The hallways buzzed with the controlled chaos of elementary school life. Bulletin boards covered in artwork, the smell of cafeteria food, and the distant sound of children's laughter filtering through classroom doors. Ms. Harper. The secretary paused beside a large window that looked out onto the playground. Before we tour the computer facilities, would you like to see our outdoor learning space? It's one of our proudest features. Victoria nodded, though she wasn't particularly interested in educational philosophy. But as they stepped outside, her attention was immediately captured by a scene near the basketball court. Daniel Rodriguez knelt on the asphalt beside a small girl with pigtails, carefully examining her scraped knee while an older girl hovered nearby with obvious concern. "That's Mr. Rodriguez," the secretary said, following Victoria's gaze. "He volunteers during lunch hour twice a week. His daughters go here, and he's wonderful with all the children. Grace and Lily are lucky girls." Victoria watched as Daniel pulled a small first aid kit from his jacket pocket, cleaning the little girl's scrape with gentle efficiency. Grace stood beside him, holding band-aids and offering soft words of comfort, while Lily entertained the injured child with an elaborate story about brave princesses and magical healing powers. It was a perfect tableau of tenderness, and Victoria felt that familiar stab of longing mixed with something sharper. They belonged together, the three of them. It was evident in the way they moved around each other, anticipating needs and responding to unspoken cues. Daniel's calm competence, Grace's nurturing maturity, Lily's irrepressible warmth. They formed a complete unit that needed nothing and no one else. The realization hit Victoria like a physical blow. There was no room in this picture for someone like her. "Should we go introduce you?" the secretary asked brightly. "No," Victoria said quickly, stepping back from the window. I don't want to interrupt. Let's continue with the tour. But she couldn't concentrate on computer labs or educational partnerships. Her mind remained fixed on the image of Daniel with his daughters, the easy intimacy of their interactions, the way they fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Victoria had spent her entire adult life believing that anything could be acquired with enough determination and resources. But watching Daniel's family, she finally understood that some things, the most important things, couldn't be bought or negotiated or strategically obtained. That evening, Victoria found herself driving past Lakewood Elementary long after her meeting had ended. The parking lot was empty, the playground deserted, but she could still see Daniel kneeling on the asphalt, could still hear Lily's voice spinning stories about magical princesses. The memory felt like a door closing, shutting her out of a world she desperately wanted to enter but didn't know how to approach. Over the following weeks, Victoria began to notice the subtle ways Daniel maintained boundaries between his professional and personal life. He was unfailingly polite during meetings, respectful and competent, but there was a quality of careful distance in his interactions with her. When she asked about his weekend plans, he would mention activities without details. When she suggested after-hours meetings, he would counter with early morning alternatives. When she complimented his work, he would thank her professionally and redirect the conversation to technical matters. It wasn't rudeness. Daniel was too considerate for that. But Victoria recognized the signs of someone protecting something precious. She had seen the same careful boundaries in business negotiations when someone had too much to lose. Daniel was keeping her at arm's length, not out of dislike, but out of caution. He sensed something in her attention that made him wary, some intensity that didn't belong in the safe, professional distance he had established. The awareness stung more than Victoria wanted to admit. She was accustomed to commanding respect, to having her interest welcomed and her attention valued. But Daniel treated her focus like a potential threat, something to be managed rather than appreciated. The more she tried to connect, the more politely he withdrew. It was like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. The breaking point came during a late November evening when rain drummed against the conference room windows. Victoria had scheduled a meeting to review the Aurora project, knowing it would require them to work late. She told herself it was purely professional, but the truth was more complicated. She wanted time alone with Daniel, wanted to understand the man behind the careful boundaries, wanted to find a way past the walls he had built around his private life. They had been working for hours, the conference room empty except for the two of them, and the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Daniel had been focused on technical specifications, his pen moving steadily across blueprints, while Victoria pretended to review contract amendments. The familiar comfort of his presence, the quiet concentration that had first drawn her attention months ago, suddenly felt unbearable. She had rehearsed her words a dozen times, standing before her bathroom mirror like an actress preparing for the performance of her life. She had arguments prepared for every possible objection, solutions for every practical concern Daniel might raise. Financial security for his daughter's college education, a house in the best school district, opportunities that his current salary could never provide. She had built her case like a business proposal, thorough and compelling and utterly logical. What she hadn't prepared for was the way Daniel looked when she finally spoke the words aloud. "Daniel," she said, her voice cutting through the peaceful silence. He looked up from his work, pen poised above the paper, and Victoria saw her own reflection in his glasses, distorted, desperate, nothing like the composed CEO she had always been. "Yes, Ms. Harper?" The formal address stung, even though she had never invited him to call her anything else. But tonight, formality felt like a wall she needed to tear down, a barrier between her and the life she had convinced herself she could have. "I need to tell you something." Daniel set down his pen carefully, giving her his full attention with the same focused intensity he brought to engineering problems. But there was something guarded in his expression, a wariness that suggested he sensed what was coming. "I've been watching you," Victoria began, then immediately regretted the words. They sounded stalkerish, invasive, nothing like the romantic declaration she had intended. "What I mean is, I've been observing the way you work, the way you prioritize your family, the kind of man you are." Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ms. Harper, I'm not sure this is appropriate. Please," Victoria interrupted, leaning forward across the mahogany table that suddenly felt like an ocean between them. "Just let me finish." Daniel nodded slowly, but his posture had shifted, becoming more formal, more distant. The easy companionship of their evening work session evaporated, replaced by the careful tension of someone preparing to deliver or receive bad news. "You're an extraordinary father," Victoria continued, her prepared speech unraveling as she spoke. "The way you love your daughters, the sacrifices you've made for them, the man you've become because of them, I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you," Daniel said quietly. "That means a great deal, coming from you." But Victoria could hear the "but" in his tone, the gentle rejection already forming. She pressed on, desperation making her clumsy. "I could help," she said, the words tumbling out too fast. "I have resources, connections, opportunities. Grace could attend the best private schools. Lily could have the finest music teachers. I could provide stability, security, everything they need for the future you want to give them." Daniel's face had gone very still, his dark eyes studying her with an expression she couldn't read. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the rain against the windows and the distant hum of the city below. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ms. Harper?" Victoria took a deep breath, gathering the courage for the words that would either change everything or destroy the careful professional relationship they had built. "Marry me, Daniel. I'll help you raise your daughters." The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a prayer, like a confession she had never intended to make. Victoria watched Daniel's face for any sign of consideration, any hint that her offer might be welcome. Instead, she saw something that looked like sadness, tinged with the kind of pity that cut deeper than anger ever could. Daniel was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving from Victoria's face to the rain-soaked windows, then back again. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but absolutely firm. "Someone as cold as ice like you can't raise my children to be warm-hearted." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow, stealing her breath and stopping her heart. She had prepared for practical objections, financial concerns, questions about logistics and timing. She had never prepared for this. The quiet, devastating assessment of her character, the suggestion that she was fundamentally unfit for the life she desperately wanted. "I could learn," she whispered, but even as she spoke the words, they sounded hollow. "I could change." Daniel shook his head slowly, his expression infinitely sad. "My daughters have already lost one parent, Ms. Harper. They need someone who knows how to love them, not someone who thinks love is a skill that can be acquired." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, to present her case, to explain all the ways she could adapt and improve and become worthy of the life he had built. But looking into Daniel's eyes, she saw something that stopped the words in her throat. Not cruelty, but a kind of protective love so fierce it left no room for negotiation. He wasn't rejecting her because he disliked her or wanted to hurt her. He was rejecting her because he knew, with the absolute certainty of a father who had already lost too much, that she couldn't give his daughters what they needed. Not because she was evil or selfish, but because she had never learned how to be warm. Because 15 years of building ice castles around her heart had left her fundamentally unable to create the kind of home where children could grow up feeling safe and cherished and unconditionally loved. The silence that followed felt like the end of everything. Victoria sat frozen across from Daniel, her carefully constructed proposal crumbling around her like a building whose foundation had proved unsound. She had offered him everything she thought he wanted: security, opportunity, partnership, and he had seen through to the cold emptiness at her core. "I should go," Daniel said finally, gathering his papers with the same careful precision he brought to everything. "Grace and Lily will be waiting for me to help with dinner." Victoria nodded numbly, unable to trust her voice. She watched him pack his briefcase, noted the way he handled the small framed photograph with extra gentleness, as if protecting it from contamination. When he reached the conference room door, he paused and turned back. "Ms. Harper," he said, and for the first time in months, her formal title sounded like a kindness instead of a barrier. "I hope you find what you're looking for, but it isn't with us." After he left, Victoria remained alone in the conference room, surrounded by the weight of her own inadequacy. The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, and somewhere across the city, Daniel Rodriguez was driving home to daughters who would ask about his day and listen to his answers and never doubt that they were the most important people in his world. Victoria Harper, CEO of a company worth $200 million, owner of properties in 3 states, featured on magazine covers and quoted in business journals, finally understood the difference between being successful and being worthy of love. The understanding came too late to change what had happened, but perhaps not too late to change what came next. She sat in the empty conference room until security made their final rounds, then drove home through the rain to her penthouse apartment, where no one waited for her arrival or noticed her absence. The silence that had once felt like luxury now echoed with everything she had never learned to give. The next morning, Victoria arrived at Harper Technologies before sunrise, as she had every day for 15 years. But instead of diving into quarterly reports and merger negotiations, she sat at her desk and stared at the framed photograph of herself receiving the Businesswoman of the Year award. The woman in the picture looked confident, successful, utterly in control. She also looked completely alone. Victoria opened her laptop and began typing an email to her head of HR. Daniel Rodriguez would be offered a transfer to the Portland office, she decided, with a significant promotion and salary increase. It would be positioned as recognition of his exceptional work on the Aurora project, an opportunity to lead the new Northwest Division. He could keep his daughters in their school district, maintain their stability, and never have to see her again. It wasn't kindness exactly. It was self-preservation wrapped in corporate courtesy. Victoria couldn't undo what she had revealed about herself the night before, but she could ensure that Daniel never had to feel uncomfortable in his workplace because of her inappropriate confession. Over the following weeks, Victoria threw herself into work with an intensity that impressed even her most ambitious executives. She negotiated 3 major acquisitions, launched 2 new product lines, and increased company profits by 18%. To outside observers, she seemed more focused and driven than ever. But late at night, alone in her corner office, Victoria found herself researching things she had never considered before. Articles about emotional intelligence, books about building meaningful relationships, volunteer opportunities that might teach her how to connect with people without trying to manage or improve them. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was approaching warmth like a business problem to be solved, a skill set to be acquired through research and strategic implementation. But it was the only way she knew how to learn anything, and perhaps admitting her deficiency was the first step toward addressing it. Daniel accepted the Portland transfer with the same quiet professionalism he brought to everything. During their final project meeting, he thanked her for the opportunity with genuine gratitude, never mentioning the evening that had changed everything. His replacement was a brilliant young engineer named Sarah Chen, fresh from Stanford with innovative ideas and no complicated personal history. On Daniel's last day, Victoria watched from her office window as he loaded his personal items into his Honda Civic. Grace and Lily had come to help him move, their young voices carrying across the parking garage as they carefully packed his framed photographs and desk plants. Victoria had never seen them up close before that day, but even from a distance their resemblance to their father was unmistakable. As Daniel's car disappeared into Seattle traffic for the final time, Victoria felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not because she was glad to see him go, but because she had finally done something that prioritized someone else's comfort over her own desires. It was a small step toward the kind of person she might eventually become, but it was a step nonetheless. 6 months later, Victoria received a brief email from Daniel's new assistant in Portland. The Northwest Division was exceeding all performance expectations under his leadership. He had implemented several innovations that were being adopted company-wide. Grace had made honor roll, and Lily had performed a piano solo at the Regional Youth Music Festival. Victoria read the update twice, then deleted it without responding. She was genuinely happy for their success, but her role in their lives was finished. She had learned, perhaps too late for her own happiness, but not too late for theirs, that love sometimes meant maintaining distance when your presence caused more harm than good. The lesson had cost her everything she thought she wanted, but it had taught her something valuable about the difference between loving someone and needing to be loved by them. Victoria Harper was still learning how to be warm, still practicing the art of connection without control. It was slow work, harder than any business challenge she had ever faced. But sometimes, when she volunteered at the Children's Hospital on Saturday mornings or listened without offering solutions when her assistant mentioned family problems, Victoria caught glimpses of the person she might become. Someone who could give without expecting returns, who could care without trying to manage, who could love without needing to possess. It wasn't the life she had planned, and it certainly wasn't the fairy tale ending she had once imagined. But it was honest work, the kind that built character instead of just building empires. And perhaps, Victoria thought as she sat in her corner office watching another Seattle sunset, that was the warmest thing she had ever learned to do. The mahogany conference table where she had made her desperate offer remained in the executive conference room, witness to hundreds of successful negotiations and strategic decisions. But Victoria never used it for personal conversations again. Some lessons, she had learned, were too important to risk repeating. Daniel Rodriguez continued to thrive in Portland, building innovative engineering solutions and raising his daughters with the same careful devotion that had first attracted Victoria's attention. He never knew about the volunteer work she had started, or the management style changes she had implemented to be less controlling with her employees, or the small ways she was learning to be warmer without trying to buy her way into anyone's heart. That anonymity was intentional. Victoria's growth was her own responsibility, not something to be performed for his approval or anyone else's. She was learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, that the most meaningful changes happened in private, when no one was watching and there was no applause for getting it right. The rain that had witnessed her confession and his rejection continued to fall on Seattle, washing the city clean for new beginnings that some people were ready to embrace. And in her corner office, Victoria Harper sat alone but no longer quite so cold, practicing the difficult art of becoming someone worth knowing, even if she might never be someone worth loving by the people she had wanted most to love her. It was honest work, and for the first time in her life, that felt like enough.